It's my special pleasure to welcome everyone here today to our third installment here at Microsoft of the SETI Institute Colloquium Series. Special pleasure for me as I spent 15 years here on this campus. And it's also my honor to introduce Dr. Leo Blitz. He received his bachelor's from Cornell and both his master's and PhD from Columbia. Apparently he got tired of the bad weather on the East Coast, moved to Berkeley in 1978. However, he was soon called back to become a professor at the University of Maryland, where he founded the Laboratory for Millimeter Wave Astronomy. In 1996, he returned to California for good as director of Berkeley's Radio Astronomy Lab, a position he held until 2008. Dr. Blitz studies galaxy birth and evolution and the nature of dark matter on galactic scales, particularly in dwarf galaxies and the outer reaches of our own Milky Way. He operated the Karma Array 15 millimeter wave telescopes, where he was the co-investigator of the EDGE survey. It measured the distribution of cold star-forming gas in 170 statistically representative galaxies and enabled a deep view into stellar formation processes. He was also the director of the Allen Telescope Array, close to our hearts, from 2006 and 2008. It's used to study everything from space debris in low Earth orbit to galaxy formation to SETI follow-up Kepler exoplanets. And thanks to support from people like you, it's being upgraded as we speak to be more sensitive and cover a broad set of wavelengths. My honor to introduce Dr. Leo Blitz.
Thank you. Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. What I'd like to do is tell you that what I'm really going to be talking about today is how galaxies evolve, and it's a certain subclass of galaxy, which are called elliptical galaxies. And I wanted to just give you the outline for the talk. First, we'll talk about the properties of these galaxies. And the goal is to learn about what the origin of the gas is, where it comes from, where it's going. And most important of all, why do we care? Why is this important to us? We'll talk about halfway through about the properties of supermassive black holes that we find in the centers of these galaxies, and how we'll find some more, and ultimately the fate of the gas in at least some of these galaxies, whether it's the gas goes into forming stars or whether it gets expelled from the galaxies themselves. So let me begin by showing a figure which is near and dear to the hearts of astronomy students. This is a classification scheme of galaxies that was first introduced by Edwin Hubble about 100 years ago. Now, what's amazing about this classification scheme is that it's still the most widely used classification scheme, and I'll be referring to it during the duration of the talk. So this is called a tuning fork diagram, and we split between spiral galaxies and elliptical galaxies. The spiral galaxies are given classification names with letter designations, and there are spiral galaxies, normal spiral galaxies, and they differ by how much gas and dust they have, how much star formation they make, etc. Then there's an additional class of galaxies called the barred spiral galaxies, which are like the normal galaxies, except they have a bar in the middle. The Milky Way galaxy, our own galaxy, is a barred spiral galaxy. And then there's the elliptical galaxies, which are formless blobs of stars where nothing much is going on in them. They have elliptical shapes, and at the nexus of the tuning fork are the S0 galaxies, which are like the elliptical galaxies, but are more disk-shaped. They have no spiral arms, and very little or no gas and dust. So what are the important properties of these galaxies? Let's take a look and see some examples. This is a normal spiral galaxy, M81. This is relatively close to the Milky Way. And you can see the well-formed spiral arms here, and you'll see blue dots throughout this galaxy. And these blue dots are regions where stars are currently forming. A barred spiral galaxy is typified by this NGC 1300, where we see this straight section, or almost straight section, going across the nucleus of the galaxy, and with spiral arms coming off the edge of the spiral, the bar. Now, if we take a look at, can we lower the lights just a little bit for, well, it's not entirely necessary. The galaxy, 1/4 of this elliptical galaxy is outlined here. Yeah, and you can just barely make out there are gazillions of stars in this region here. This is the nucleus with a jet of material being forced out. There's a black hole in the center of this galaxy, but you can see that this elliptical galaxy, M87, has no particular form at all, no structure residing within it. Okay, so what are the properties of these? Oh, I did want to mention one more thing here, and that is that Edwin Hubble, in making this classification scheme, called these early type galaxies, and these are late type galaxies. The spirals are late type galaxies. Early type galaxies was because he thought they were young, and that the galaxies evolved from the elliptical shape into the spiral form. Astronomers now believe that that's absolutely backwards, and that the oldest galaxies are the spiral galaxies, the late type galaxies, and the early type galaxies are older. I think I said that wrong. These are younger, and these are older galaxies. So when we talk about these elliptical galaxies, because there's very little going on in them, they're often talked about as being red and dead. Red because the stars, as they get older, lose the young stars, which are blue in color, and it turns them red. And dead because there's no star formation or not very much going on in these galaxies at all. Now, another way to see this, at least the redness of these galaxies, is a diagram here of the stellar mass of the galaxies, a plot of the stellar mass versus the color. Blue is down here and red is up here. And this diagram was made after the Sloan survey of galaxies, first done about 10 or 15 years ago. And it was found that the galaxies tend to lie in two different groups. There's a red sequence containing these galaxies and a blue sequence containing these galaxies. And if we split them up between late and early type galaxies, the early type galaxies, the elliptical galaxies, tend to hover around this part of the diagram, and the blue galaxies, the star-forming galaxies, tend to be in this part of the diagram. So what I'd like to do is talk about some work that was done largely in Europe to study these early type galaxies. And the galaxies themselves, the observations were of the neutral and ionized gas, the stellar content and kinematics of the gas, that is how they moved, the kinematics of the stars. Most of the mass of the galaxies is in the stars and not in the gas, but the gas is what is a tracer of the dynamics of the galaxy, of the movement and the forces going on in the galaxy. The main part of the Berkeley involvement in this is mapping of the molecular hydrogen in the galaxies themselves. Now, the gas comes in two forms, ionized and neutral gas, and the gas the neutral gas comes in two varieties itself. There's atomic gas and molecular gas. And the molecular gas is almost entirely molecular hydrogen. There are over 200 different molecules which have been discovered in interstellar space, but molecular hydrogen makes up more than 99% of all the molecules by number. The problem is, while molecular hydrogen is ubiquitous, it's something which can't be observed directly. The gas the clouds of gas in which they're found are very cold, and we don't detect the quantum mechanics of the hydrogen molecule is such that it's not visible at these temperatures, doesn't give off any radiation. So we use the next most abundant molecule, and this is one that can be observed in galaxies, and that's carbon monoxide. Molecules such as some very complex molecules have been found in the Milky Way, including ethyl alcohol, or vodka, basically. It's not terribly useful to try to mine this, this plethora because it's mixed in with things like hydrogen cyanide and other nasty things. So the molecular gas traces where the star formation is taking place at the present time. It inevitably forms stars unless the gas is dispersed. So if we see any regions where there are molecular clouds, this is where stars are forming or about to form. The atomic gas is the reservoir out of which this molecular gas forms. So let's take a look at some observations of these early type galaxies in atomic hydrogen. So what we see in the centers of each of these figures, these panels, is the optical, this emission from the stars in the galaxies themselves. And in contours are the atomic hydrogen in these galaxies. Now, the atomic hydrogen comes in various forms. This is what is called an unsettled form. The hydrogen molecule sometimes falls into disks that is larger than the galaxies themselves, and sometimes in disks which are in the centers of the galaxies and don't extend as far out as the starlight does. So the detection rate of these galaxies is about a third. About a third of these galaxies contain atomic gas, and this is a greater percentage than the almost 25% of the galaxies that contain carbon monoxide. or molecular hydrogen. If I talk about carbon monoxide, you should keep in mind that what I'm really talking about is the molecular hydrogen, the star-forming gas in these galaxies. So it turns out that many of the CO molecular hydrogen detections have no atomic hydrogen around them. Many of the atomic hydrogen detections have no CO. And we'd like to find out what we can say about the gas in these galaxies that tells us whether these galaxies are just going to continue to hang around forever or something else is going on. So if we take a look at the galaxies that contain CO, these are marked in this this diagram, and one would be hard-pressed to find a common origin or something about some morphology of the atomic hydrogen that tells you whether or not there's going to be molecular hydrogen in the center or not. But if you can find it, please explain it to me. But I've, and many others have looked to try to get the relationship between the atomic and molecular hydrogen to no avail. Let me skip this part. Of the 56 detections of molecular hydrogen, 42% are also detected in atomic hydrogen. Of the 53 detections of atomic hydrogen, 43% are detected in CO. So you might think that where we have one, we have the other, but in fact, these turn out to be different galaxies. And the amount of gas that's associated with the ones that have gas is they range from about 100 million times the mass of the sun to 10 billion times the mass of the sun. And the molecular gas is less than 1 billion times the mass of the sun. Now, to put this number in perspective, we can ask how much of this stuff is in the Milky Way. And the Milky Way contains about 5 times 10 to the 9th solar masses of atomic hydrogen, and a little less than 10 to the 9th solar masses of molecular hydrogen. And so what we find is that many of these galaxies contain as much gas as the late-type galaxies, or the active star-forming galaxies. So we might expect that these galaxies are forming stars, and in fact, they are. And we know this because we see evidence of the star formation process in these galaxies, and because they contain great amounts of molecular hydrogen. So these are spectra taken in 2 transitions of molecular carbon monoxide. And you can see these are spectra where we're looking at frequency axis frequency on one axis and the intensity on the other axis. And we this arrow, we talk about these velocities because the frequency is translated immediately into velocities because through the Doppler shift, and that tells us about the motions of the galaxies themselves. So we see, in fact, that the carbon monoxide can be quite strong in some of these galaxies, and those of you who have children have no doubt watched Sesame Street at one time in your life. And you'll recognize that one of these things is not like the other. And you might think, you might ask, try to imagine which of these things is different from the others, including the galaxies that I haven't shown, and it's this one. This is NGC 1266. We're going to come back to that at the end, towards the end of the talk today, and talk about how that's different. So this is something I've already said. Almost a quarter of the galaxies are detected in molecular hydrogen. So we can plot the galaxies with molecular hydrogen or carbon monoxide on one of these diagrams that I showed earlier on, where we have the blue cloud and the red sequence, and you can see that the galaxies with carbon monoxide populate the entire diagram. And since it populates the entire diagram, many of these galaxies are blue because they're forming stars. Well, in fact, they're all forming stars, but you see no difference in the mass. The size of each of these dots depends on the mass of molecular hydrogen in the galaxies. And we see that they populate, if not evenly, all regions of the diagram. So the galaxies themselves are forming stars. They have material connected to them to form more stars, and many of them turn out to be blue in color. So these galaxies are neither red nor dead, because they'll continue to form other stars. So what can we learn about the galaxies themselves? With the Karma array, Jack Welch was responsible for having built the predecessor of which is the BIMA array. The BIMA array was put together with the Caltech's Owens Valley array to build the Karma array, and we made observations of these galaxies where we're able to map them, and you see that in this particular diagram itself. Now what you can see is that the carbon monoxide often takes up very, very little of the volume of the galaxy. Sometimes it is quite extended, but most of the time it's quite small in extent. So is this something that can tell us, this simple observation that we see, something that can tell us about the origin of the gas in these galaxies? Another set of observations that we can make with the same telescope is to look at the velocities of different parts of the galaxy. So where we have, in this particular diagram, where we have a blue region, that represents gas which is moving towards us, and in the red region, it's gas which is moving away from us. If it's regularly, the contours are regularly spaced across it, what it says is that these are clouds of gas that are rotating. So if they're rotating, we can define an axis of rotation which is perpendicular to the velocity structure of the galaxy itself. And we can see that most of these galaxies are rotating in a quite regular fashion, which tells us that they're in disks of gas which are inside the galaxies themselves. Some of them are not so regular. This particular galaxy has quite complex motions in it, and as do some of the others. Now, galaxies form stars. We now know that some of the elliptical galaxies, that the early type galaxies form stars. But if we take a look at the distribution of stars and the amount of gas that they have in them in a galaxy, we get a plot like this. So what this plot does is it shows us, we're plotting along the x-axis the surface density of gas, the amount of gas that we see along a line of sight. And this is the rate of star formation from these galaxies. This was plotted initially for all of the galaxies, but we now know that this depends only on the amount of molecular gas that we have in the galaxies. So the more molecular gas there is, the higher it is, the higher is the star formation rate. And all of these galaxies lie on this well-defined line. So this has been checked out in many other galaxies, many other samples, and we see this relationship between the amount of molecular gas and the amount of star formation in the galaxies. What about these early type galaxies? Are they the same or are they going to be different? Well, it turns out they're sort of the same, but sort of different, in fact. And what happens, the black dots and the blue dots are normal galaxies, and the red dots here are the galaxies where stars are forming in the galaxies themselves. And again, we're making a plot of surface density, of molecular height, of total gas versus the star formation rate in the gas. And we see that the red dots seem to lie below all of the other dots. This is by about a factor of 2 or 3, and these galaxies, the star formation rate in these early type galaxies, while being profuse, is less by a factor of 2 or 3 than the late type galaxies. So the early type galaxies form stars at a lower efficiency than the stars in regular galaxies, and we don't know why. So this becomes an active area of research, of trying to understand what's different about the star formation process in these galaxies than in the other galaxies. So we'd like to make other comparisons between the molecular gas in the elliptical galaxies and the spiral galaxies. And I point you back to the figure where we looked at the extent, and we saw that the extent of the molecular gas tends to be relatively small. And here we compare to a survey of late type galaxies, and this is just a histogram of the number of galaxies that we find with the CO going out to some particular radius. And we see that the extent of the gas is larger in the late type galaxies than in the early type galaxies. Okay, well, so what? We can ask this question in another way, is that since the stars provide the gravity which holds the gas in place, we can ask, what if we normalize this distribution of galaxies to the light that's coming from the gas, the extent of the light? The light in the early type galaxies is more concentrated than the late type galaxies, and when we normalize this, we see that the distribution of molecular gas is indistinguishable from that in the early type galaxies. We can do this in another way by looking at the total extent of the stars in the galaxies, and we see that the larger extent of the gas in the late type galaxies also goes away. So while the molecular gas is not as extended in the early type galaxies compared to the light from the stars, it's about the same. We don't see so much difference. Now, we can also ask, compare the alignment of the rotation axis with the rotation axis of the stars in the galaxy. So when we do this, we find that the distribution of sizes of the galaxies are about the same, whether we're talking about galaxies that are aligned with the rotation axis of the galaxies is aligned with that of the gas or misaligned. Now this becomes important because galaxies that have their rotation axis misaligned, the gas must come from outside of the galaxies. So that the gas in galaxies can come from two different locations. They can come from outside, or the stars, as they age, give off gas, and that gas can be collected in the centers of the galaxies. But it's the rotation of the gas that tells us what the origin of this gas is. If it's misaligned, if the rotation axes are misaligned, then it must be coming from the outside. And the reason for that has to do with the conservation of angular momentum. In other words, the stars in these galaxies are rotating, and as the stars are rotating, they give off gas. The gas must share in that rotation, must have the same sort of rotation. We find that there are large numbers of galaxies where there are misalignments in the rotation axes, and therefore they must be coming from the outside. We can also take a look. Some of these galaxies are in a cluster of galaxies called the Virgo cluster. The Virgo cluster is the nearest supergiant cluster of galaxies. The Milky Way is on the outskirts of the Virgo cluster. But the Virgo cluster is filled with hot ionized plasma, and that hot ionized plasma can strip off some of the material from the outer parts of the galaxies. So for the galaxies within Virgo, the Virgo cluster, the extent of the gas is relatively small, and for those in the field, the extent is much larger, so that the galaxies that are not in the cluster tend to be fed well, let me back up a second. In the Virgo cluster, this gas is stripped out, whereas in the field, the gas is not stripped out. So here's where we can learn something about more quantitatively about the origin of the gas in the galaxy. And we ask, what is the orientation between the stars and the molecular gas? And you can see that for the most part, the rotation axes are aligned with one another. This is a plot of the angle which separates the rotation axes. And we see that a large number of these galaxies have misaligned rotation. So all of these galaxies must be coming from the outside. Now, we don't have that many galaxies in our sample where we have maps of the molecular gas. So we'd like to use the ionized gas, which is easier to detect. So if we plot the misalignment between the rotation axes of the atomic gas and that of the molecular gas, we see that those two things are very, very much aligned. So we can use the ionized gas as a tracer for the rotation. And if we do that, we find that in the Virgo cluster, again, just demonstrating with more galaxies, there's only two galaxies that appear to have gas coming from the outside, whereas in the field, just galaxies around the field, the distribution of rotation axes is very, very different. So this tells us that roughly half of the galaxies that are in the field are being fed from the outside. So the fact that these galaxies are not red or dead comes about because the big galaxies are eating smaller galaxies that have rich amounts of gas in them, and that gas falls into the center of the galaxies to form stars. So let's just summarize here before we go on. The molecular and the ionized gas share the same kinematics. That means that they have the same origin, that 42% of the galaxies have misalignments with the stars. That says that at least 42%, the gas must be coming from the outside. Some of the gas where there is an alignment may also be coming from the outside, but we don't know that. So there's some other points here to be made about fast and slow rotation, but that's going to take us a little bit far away. Well, one of the other things that have become noteworthy in astronomy over the last 15 to 20 years is that if we look at the centers of early type galaxies, they contain evidence of supermassive black holes. And the way you know about that is by looking at very, very high resolution, with very high resolution optical telescopes. What you see is the random motions of the stars. As you get very close to the center, it starts to increase because of the effects of the gravity of the black hole. And an astronomer named Megorian at Cambridge produced a diagram that looks like this with fewer galaxies on it. And he noticed that if he makes the plot on the x-axis, we plot the velocity dispersion of the gas, or the random motions of the stars against the mass of the black hole, we find a good relationship between the two. And that tells us that the galaxies, as they evolve, because these galaxies tend to be the most massive up here, the galaxies that are the most massive also have the most massive black holes in the centers. These black holes, the largest black hole that you get from the normal process of the evolution of stars in the galaxy is tens of solar masses, whereas in the centers of these galaxies, we're talking about 10 million to 10 billion times the mass of the sun. And these black holes are somehow being fed and are grown, we believe, through mergers and collisions between these galaxies. The problem is that we'd like to extend this to other kinds of galaxies, and we'd like to extend them, in fact, to late-type galaxies. But the problem is that the late-type galaxies have a lot of gas and dust in the centers that prevents us from seeing into the centers themselves. These galaxies that make up most of this diagram are in fact galaxies that have no or very, very little dust in the centers of the galaxies themselves. But carbon monoxide is a molecule. The emission from the carbon monoxide molecule is not absorbed by the dust that's in the centers of the galaxies. So we can look at the galaxies themselves and the centers in carbon monoxide. If we can do it at a high enough resolution, then we can see whether there are stars in some of these other galaxies. Not stars, black holes, excuse me. So what is a signature of a black hole in carbon monoxide? Well, we can take a look at the expected velocity dispersion. These are simulations of the galaxies. And the blue line represents the rotation of the galaxies. Here we're plotting the velocity versus distance from the center in seconds of arc. So they're very, very small differences. And we, from the stars alone, gives us this blue line. If we plot with a model that contains black holes in the center, then these black holes cause this blue line to curve upwards and downwards on opposite sides of the galaxy. And we have to look to see if there are such signatures in some of these galaxies themselves. So let's take a look at one particular galaxy, and you see 4526 that was observed also with the Karma telescope. And this Karma telescope was able to make observations at a much higher resolution than any other millimeter wave telescope, and can probe right down into the region where the gravity of the black hole affects the motions of the gas. So these black lines represent models of the stars in these galaxies, and the red area here is the is the data for the collection of the galaxies. And we see another way to describe this. This line here tells us the rotation that's caused by the stars, and this is the data. So you can see that close into the center, this particular galaxy is not following this line because it is not modeled with a black hole in the center. If we have a model with a black hole in the center, then the agreement is quite good. And if we put in a black hole that has too much mass, again, we get a disagreement with the data itself. So these galaxies, any galaxy where we can detect CO in the center at high enough resolution, we can determine whether there is one of these supermassive black holes in it or not. And now with the telescopes that are replacing the Karma telescope, this is the ALMA telescope in northern Chile, these kinds of measurements and observations are routine, and our group is getting sufficient time to be able to ultimately increase the range of these galaxies. We'd like to know, are there galaxies with black holes in them that don't show any evidence of collisions, earlier collisions, or dwarf galaxies have black holes, and what are the largest black holes that we can detect as well. Let me end with what started out as a puzzle, and let me lead you through the solutions to this puzzle. This is one of the early type galaxies, NGC 1266. This is the one that was not like the others. And this is the kind of spectra we see from typical galaxies. And this is the emission that we see from this galaxy that was not like the others. What's different about them is that this has wings on the profile itself, which extend to very, very high velocities. And as it extends to very high velocities, that tells us that this gas must be escaping from this galaxy. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I assume I'm running out of time. We can plot the emission from this galaxy with two Gaussians. This is the core of the galaxy itself, and this is a Gaussian that represents the wings of the emission of the gas that's coming out. So the mass of the core is a billion solar masses, and that's in a tiny region near the center of the galaxy is as much molecular gas as we have in the Milky Way as a whole. Is this gas material going around a black hole, or is it flowing out of the center of the galaxy? So we have here a map, again done with the Karma array of the extent of the molecular gas. And the molecular gas in the center is rotating. So what we'd like to do to understand how this gas is oriented, make a interferometric map of the core of the line, which is where most of the mass is, and these wings of the line, which is where gas is being expelled. And this is what it looks like. So we have a disk, a fat disk, in the center of the galaxy, and the blue wing is centered on one end of this disk, and the red wing is on the other edge of the disk. The rotation is going like this across the galaxy, and so we have a galaxy where the ultimate fate of this gas is to fall towards the center of the galaxy and ultimately become expelled from the galaxy itself. Do we, this is one way that the galaxies can lose their gas, but we don't know if this is the only way that it happens. So let me just summarize what I hope that you will have come away with from this talk, is that many early type galaxies are neither red nor dead, that early type galaxies contain black holes in their nuclei that can be probed with carbon monoxide observations at high resolution, and that NGC 1266 has a tiny molecular gas disk in the center that is expelling material from both ends in a fat jet, but we're left with a puzzle here, which is that since all gas has some angular momentum, as it comes towards the center, it must lose that angular momentum. And we'd like to know how that has happened, because all of the plausible mechanisms for that expulsion, expulsion of the angular momentum don't seem to work. So with that, I'll end, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blitz. I think we have some time for some questions. I'll start with the first question as my moderator privilege. My question is, dark matter is something you haven't said anything about and seems a perfect vehicle to explain unseen mechanics. And so I wonder how much that's been considered or mapped relative to this set of galaxies and what you've talked about.
The early type galaxies, the dark matter in galaxies was first detected around late type galaxies because it was easier to measure the rotation of these galaxies. Shortly afterwards, dark matter was detected in these early type galaxies as well, because the stars in them were moving too fast to be explained by just the gravity of the galaxies themselves. So we are able to deduce the presence of dark matter in them. What I've been talking about today is more of the central regions of these galaxies where the dark matter doesn't play so much of a role.
Thank you for your talk. You started out with the Hubble tuning fork and said it's been used for 100 years, and said the early and late, he got it backwards. Is time ripe for a new classification and new terminology, or maybe that's already been done? This is not my field, I just might not know.
Right, the time has been right for a long time, in fact, and there are many astronomers who've tried to produce new schemes. The problem with this scheme is that it's qualitative. It depends on the eye of the observer. And these new schemes all suffered from the same fate. However, what's being done now is that there's a correlation between the type of galaxy, and especially in the spiral galaxies, and their rotation speed. The SAs rotate faster than the SBs that rotate faster than the SCs. And the rotation of these galaxies is a particularly good quantitative measure of the galaxy type, and that's what we use when we're doing quantitative work.
Leo, I'd like to go back to how we turn the observations of CO into the mass of molecular hydrogen and then the total gas mass. Is there any reason to believe that that relationship should have an evolutionary trend along that Hubble sequence? Or do we always use the same relationship?
It's a very good question, Jill. In fact, it's been one that has plagued observers of galaxies who are now able to look back in time by looking at highly redshifted systems. They've made various measurements to try to determine how the carbon monoxide is related quantitatively to the molecular hydrogen. And it appears that the local conversion holds even to times as early as about 9 billion years ago. Beyond that, we don't know. The observations haven't been made. There's no reason why the relationship should be the same, yet it is, as far as we can tell.
So I have a question about the last bullet point on the slide, which is that, so if I'm understanding correctly, that the centers of these galaxies are spewing out CO and other metals, and they're getting absorbed by the galaxies and reenergizing star formation. But most of the CO was measured in the center of the galaxies. So it seems like there's like a transfer not to the outer parts of the galaxies where I would expect stuff absorbed from the intergalactic medium to wind up, but it goes like direct falls into the center very quickly. And can you speak to that, please?
Yes, also a very good question. All the questions are good. The thing is that both things happen. We're getting material from the outside of these galaxies that we can tell from the misalignments of the rotation axes. So we have hydrogen, atomic hydrogen in the outskirts, and that falls in to the galaxies and takes its angular momentum with it. Now, we have to get rid of that angular momentum. The observations tell us that the gas knows how to get rid of the angular momentum, even if we don't know how to do it. There are several ways of doing it. For example, if there's a companion galaxy along with it, if there were spiral arms, that would be a way to do it, but none of these things exist in these galaxies. And so they've lost this angular momentum in a way that we just don't understand.
I'm wondering what you make of the galaxies that are detected in CO, but they have no H1 detections. The other way around could be easily understood.
Right.
But I'm baffled by that.
Well, I think the answer is, and the answer has not been studied in detail, and we'd like to do this, is that the central regions of these galaxies, if there's an intergalactic medium of hot gas that pervades the galaxies themselves, that gas is under pressure, which is caused by the gravity of the galaxies themselves. In the early type galaxies, the pressure is very, very high. So if you have a higher pressure on the gas, you have more collisions between the dust and the atomic hydrogen, which is what you need to be able to convert it to molecular hydrogen. Does that answer your question? Let me say that more succinctly. We have the material in the centers of the galaxies are under higher pressure than they are in late type galaxies. And when the gas is under higher pressure, it's getting squeezed more, and as it gets squeezed more, more molecules tend to form. We have ways now of probing this quantitatively, which we're in the process of doing. Basically, you convert the atomic into molecular, and in the regions of highest pressure, you see the highest concentration of molecules.
If I understood correctly, towards the beginning of the talk, you said that we don't quite understand why the rate of star formation in early type galaxies is less than the current later types. But can't we have a hypothesis, or isn't there a hypothesis that population 3 stars burn so furiously that they ionize and their radiation dampen the formation of other stars?
Probably not, because there's so little ionized gas in even the galaxies that contain ionized gas that it probably doesn't have much of an effect. However, there are gravitational instabilities that can give rise to the collapse of these clouds into stars. And if we can make certain kinds of measurements, we can determine what these instabilities are. Typically, they're known as tomb ray instabilities, after the mathematician, actually, who first derived the relationships for them. And that is what I would think is the most likely explanation, that the instability of the gas to forming clumps and star-forming entities is probably greater in the late-type galaxies than in the early-type galaxies.
All right, well, I think if there's no more questions, I will thank our speaker again. I can present you with the traditional SETI mug that's filled with molecules of hydrogen, and you might want to add some oxygen to that. And
I see.
thank you so much.
Thank you.